Welcome to Ethical Economics, a campaigning podcast series that puts people, fairness and freedom at the heart of economic life. Today I'm speaking with Dom Frisby, possibly the world's first economic investor-comedian who is also a passionate libertarian. He's recently re-released his best-selling book, Life After the State, Why We Don't Need Government, and that is the focus of this podcast. Dom began his work in this field trying to figure out how to make his own investments, which led him to gold, to understanding how governments steal from their citizens through money printing, more accurately described as fiat currency, and this interest led to other precious metals and then to Bitcoin, of which he was an early adopter, and he even wrote the first mainstream book on the benefits of cryptocurrencies. In this podcast we focus on why he believes governments will always fail and, subject to the presence of market forces, will offer inferior outcomes to the private sector. Dom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. A pleasure to be here.
So I understand that you're in Edinburgh right now at the Fringe, is that right?
Absolutely right. Yeah, I'm doing a show about the history of mining, about the importance of mining, and it's one of my lectures with funny bits. And if any of your viewers and listeners happen to be in Edinburgh, it's at 2:00 every afternoon in the room in which Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations. How about that at 2:00? And I'm taking the show to London on October the 9th and 10th, if any of you are around then.
Wow, fantastic. We'll definitely get tickets for that. And I know you've just reissued Life After the State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the publisher's rights reverted to me, and rather than leave it unpublished, I just self-published it, yeah.
So that was one of my favourite books, Life After the State. Now, I got pages and pages of notes when I first read it for our first podcast. And one of the things that stood out for me was the quote at the very beginning from Lao Tzu, which is the more laws and restrictions there are, the poorer people become. The more rules and regulations, the more thieves and robbers. Therefore, the sage says, I take no action and people are reformed. I enjoy peace and people become honest. I do nothing and people become rich. I have no desires and people return to the good and simple life.
Great quote, isn't it?
It's just amazing. And
it's great. And the funny thing, I've always liked quotes. And when I was writing Life After the State, I just, because it was my first book, I just for some reason, I peppered it with quotes. Every time I found a good quote, I found a way of crowbarring it into the book. But yeah, it's interesting that, even in ancient China, they were talking about small government, laissez-faire government that doesn't get involved, government that lets people get on with it, and the result is greater wealth, both actual wealth and spiritual wealth as well.
And I wonder what are your feelings with regards to when you look at the book again and see that your analysis was pretty much bang on with nearly everything, and as you say in the introduction to the reissued book, you just can't believe, well, it's all true, but you can't believe how much worse things have got.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I'm really proud of that book. I don't think it sold that many, it sold thousands of copies, but it didn't sell hundreds of thousands of copies, but it was a pretty good seller. But loads of people say it is their favorite book. And particularly because it just makes all that philosophy of small state and individual responsibility and all of that, it just makes it accessible and readable. And I was going to update all the statistics, and then in the end I just didn't bother, because I thought I'll update them now, and then in 10 years' time they'll just be 10 years worse, and it'll still be the same problem. So I didn't bother. I just kept it so it's of its time. But most of the statistics are fairly timeless, and the arguments are fairly timeless. And but yeah, it's just. I wrote it 2012, I think I wrote it. It was published in 2013, and it was just coming out of the financial crisis. And, I'd been investing in gold, and I bought into the anti-fiat money narrative for a good 6 or 7 years before that. And I thought everything, fiat money was collapsing in 2008 at one point, and it didn't. But I just can't believe how long the system can go on for. And, if you look at ancient Rome, when Nero started debasing coinage in AD 63, and Rome didn't fall for another 300 years, but really debasement was a 50-year process for the money to go from more than 90% silver content to nothing. And so I wonder if this is it's more than a 50-year process, because it's been going on for decades. But I struggle to believe that things, if governments and countries were corporations, they would have gone bankrupt years ago.
Mm. And when you look at the book, what are the principles that stand out as the ones that have been proven the most?
The main argument of the book is that whatever the government does, the private sector can do it better. So it's kind of like an anarcho-capitalist manifesto, if you like. And the argument that we've got into the mess that we're in is it's the sound money argument. So I put most of the root causes of everything because we have a society in which one body has the power to create money at no cost to itself, the state, and everyone else has to work to get money. And when one body has that amount of power, it's inevitable that it will become disproportionately large within our society. And that's why the state has just got so big and bloated. At the turn of the 20th century, the state was at 10% of GDP. Now, by the time you factor in inflation and currency debasement, it's well in excess of 50% of GDP. And, in the Soviet Union, the maximum of the Soviet Union was only 75% of GDP. So we're not far off those numbers. But the core argument is, so fiat money is why we're here. And the core argument is that it can be done to a higher standard at a lower cost if it's delivered with market forces at play. So healthcare would be better and cheaper. And don't tell me that healthcare is free, because it isn't. We pay for it. Education would be better. Look at the internet. It's the most powerful educative tool ever invented in all history. And for the most part, it's free. Even defense could be better. Infrastructure would be better. Transport would be better. Every single thing that the government does would be done better and more cheaply with no state involvement.
So you say there's a caveat or an assumption of market forces. So just challenge you on the technical aspect of the water companies being privatized, and yet they're pumping feces into the rivers and stuff. So what's your experience, are you learning on how to ensure market forces are at play so that you do get that positive outcome?
Because the worst possible for me is crony capitalism. And that's when private companies whose main motive is profit are awarded government monopolies. And instead of the regulator being the customer, the regulator is the government. So, the punishment for Thames Water being so crap is just a fine. And it doesn't change their ways. As Charlie Munger once said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. The trains are awful because these private companies have government monopolies. And I could go on. And, I don't know how the supply of water would work in a free market situation, because the market would sort it out. But a combination of customer buying and market forces and, reviews and all these things and competition, if there were loads of different companies all competing to provide water, the water would be better, wouldn't have fluoride and all that other there'd be alternatives to having fluoride water. And it would be quickly exposed by the media which companies are running sewage into the waterways and which companies aren't. And the companies that are would just lose their customers because people don't want to sponsor that kind of stuff. So the market would just take care of everything.
Yeah.
And you don't even need, government regulators, because media now, everyone's got a mobile phone. Everyone can hold everyone to account.
Yeah. I was just drawing out some of this stuff. Is there anything else that when you look at the book, just, and you said that the book was of its time, in 2012, but it doesn't read that way.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, it was written then, but the message is time. I'm quoting Lao Tzu. He was saying the same thing in ancient China. The message is timeless. A lot of the illustrations are of that time. But, for example, if I'm making the argument about education, I tell the history of education in the 19th century. And by the time that education, the Forster Act and education was made compulsory and state education and all of that, more than 95% of the population was literate anyway. They'd done it by themselves. They didn't need it to be, they didn't need education to be compulsory. And people learn better when they're learning on a voluntary basis anyways. When you make stuff compulsory, they don't learn linear as well because it becomes a chore rather than a pleasure.
No, do you know, it's I was thinking about what you said about in the 1909 and our conversation, which I'll link into for people to go back to if they're interested. The 1909 People's Budget, and what you just said there about the solution had already been found, executed, and delivered the result, and then the government comes in and takes it over, and then all the innovation that created the result is now gone because the government now in charge.
All right.
And they can then take credit for the results that were already happening anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. The National Insurance Act, that was kind of the beginning of the end. And the National Insurance Act was several acts over several years, but it was, it was the beginning of the end, and it was because they were worried about that bottom 5%. And the friendly societies was such a successful model of the day. You have to judge them by the context of today, but they provided healthcare locally, they provided education, welfare, all those things, and they were so good, which they were offered at the time, that the government copied them and made national insurance compulsory, and people couldn't afford to pay their insurance twice. Once into national insurance, once into private insurance. So they paid the national one because they had to. They stopped paying for the private insurance, and their friendly societies all died. The only one that survived just about is the co-op.
Yeah. No, amazing.
It's really sad. And they just the friendly societies had emerged quite organically by market forces because people needed them, and they provided all these essential local services, and doctors were way more accountable under the, if some of the friendly societies behave like some GPs do today, they'd just be sacked and they'd be replaced with another doctor. But the British Medical Association hated the fact that their doctors were held to account, and so it was all for, the NHS and all the rest of it when that came around. And then we learned, how did Bevan get the doctors to agree? He stuffed their mouths with gold. That's what he said. He bribed them, basically. And now we're just seeing all these 20% pay rises for doctors. I mean, the doctors not earn enough money. It's such a clusterfuck, the NHS. It really is awful. Yeah. It's the most, and it's not just that it wastes money. It wastes, it's just inherently wasteful of stuff. It's environmentally damaging. It's just inefficient on so many different levels. It's quite immoral how wasteful the NHS is, and yet people insist that more money would sort it out. It won't.
No, I'm getting the impression that you didn't bang a pan for the NHS during lockdown.
I went out at 8 o'clock to view my neighbours banging pans.
Were you a conscientious object?
And I booed under my breath without wishing to incur the wrath of the neighbours.
One of the, I guess,
but it's a religion. It's become our religion. The state now does the things that the church used to do, provides care, provides welfare, provides education, and so we start worshipping the altar of the state. So stupid, but that's what's happened.
Well, do you know, it's one of those things where when you're making a change, how fiendishly difficult it is to persuade people that a managed retreat is much better than an inevitable collapse. But it requires, yeah.
I was just going to say, you can't persuade people. To most people, if you say no NHS, that means no care. It doesn't mean better care and cheaper care. It means no care. And people, some people get their head around that, but you're never going to get that past the media, you're not going to win that argument. So you just have to let the whole thing implode, in my opinion. There's no point even I make the argument on podcasts, but I'm not going to go on Question Time and just get absolutely, well, partly because I don't get invited on it, but I wouldn't go on there and just get absolutely lynched for suggesting that the NHS is crap. And that's what happens to people, because you're slighting their religion.
And it's I can see the positive
and the morale
behind
people who work for the NHS. God Almighty, this morale is so low.
I know someone who's been campaigning for change in their department, and they've had 18 months to 2 years of bullying from the organisation to get her to withdraw her complaints about the whistleblowing that she did about standards in the department. And so in terms of in presence of market forces such as response to feedback, changing, and offering innovative services and so on and so forth, there's that total absence. And I think it's one of those things where when I look at it, it's the absence of leadership that were not the managers. So the consultants who were supposed to be the leading it, not doing their jobs and stepping in and taking care, because they have the perverse incentive that if the NHS goes badly, then they can see those patients as private clients anyway. So it's a perverse one, isn't it? Really, very difficult.
If you look at go on Google reviews, right, and look at reviews of some of your local businesses, and you see a local restaurant which is competing for your custom with other local restaurants. The good ones will all have 4.5 stars, and sometimes even above that. Then look at your local GP, which doesn't have to compete for your custom. It's always 2.5 stars and below. And then you do the same. You look at Google reviews for local schools, which again don't have to compete for your custom, compared to Google reviews of stuff that isn't provided by government, some small business of some kind. You just can't compare the two. Mm. And if all these services were having to compete for custom, they would be so much better, but they don't. So complacency sets in, and they're terrible.
If I can draw your attention to, there's another one of the great quotes in your book, and it was from a little known book called The New Approach to Freedom. Economist E.C. Regal says, "Natural law inspiring personal enterprise induces man to help himself by helping others. To advance himself, he must contemplate and gratify the wants of others, who in turn gratify his wants through the process of specialization of labor and exchange. Thus we see that personal enterprise is cooperative and social," which I would see as a wonderful summary of all the work of Adam Smith.
I was going to say, that's Adam Smith's invisible hand right there.
Isn't it? And the quote that you mentioned in the last podcast about the the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker don't operate out of the good of the society. They operate out of their own self-interest. Mm. I just wonder about the challenge that we've got now of all the dependencies that they're now present in our system. Have we come to rely on the NHS, the government? If there's a problem, the government should sort it. If there's a problem on our streets, the police should sort it rather than us as a community sorting it. And I was just wondering if this would be the time to ask ourselves, well, how could we rebuild a friendly society and the values that were present to create the local solutions that I'm convinced that they would if we work together to create a local solution. I just don't know how we'd have enough people who understood how to work together and collaborate and to say, well, this is on us.
Yeah, well, you do find communities, there's a lot of well-meaning people in communities, and they often, when they get together and try and do something, often there are incredible results. But the problem, and families as well, but the problem is when the state is doing things that the family should do, and you can go, well, the state helps the people at the bottom, but when the family is then absolved of doing that thing. Well, when you've paid your taxes so that the state does this, you are then absolved of the responsibility because you're like, I've paid my taxes and it's doing this. The other problem is because you've paid your taxes, you are disempowered because you have less capital. If you hadn't paid your taxes and you had twice as much capital as you have, you would have more money to invest. You would have more power to make some of these things happen. But so that's the dynamic. It's you're weakened. The responsibility to do it is taken by the state, but also the ability, the power to do it is taken by the state because of the disempowering effect of taxes. And so, in my opinion, while there will always be good local initiatives, and they'll organise a street party, or they'll organise some local thing, or they have a whip round or whatever, and you get really tight knit communities like Lewis or whatever, and they invent their own money, the Lewis pound or the Brixton pound or something. But ultimately, it's pissing in the wind, and it's a small. It's good that they're doing it, but ultimately, I just think these things will happen inevitably once the state disappears. But you can't. You're almost wasting your time. I don't want to say you're wasting your time because they're really important. But when you try and do these things now, they're twice as hard because you're doing them, and the state's getting in the way, and it's also disempowering you. So it's just really, really hard.
And do you see? You've got this vision in the book. Do you see any way of building a bridge between the current reality that we've got and the new society, or the renewed society, I guess would be a better phrase for it?
Well, I think the biggest life raft we've got is Bitcoin, and I'm a big believer in sound money fixes all of this, and Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin fixes this, and there's this scenario they describe called hyper Bitcoinization, which is the sudden and rapid adoption of Bitcoin in the face of falling currencies elsewhere, but if Bitcoin carries on doing what it's been doing, then there is a solution there, because we've got this apolitical money that nobody can print that is sound, but while governments have this control of money, and while that money still has some value, I don't think anything can happen. We need fiat to carry on declining, and gold and Bitcoin to carry on appreciating to the point at which people just stop using government money. And once that happens, then everything falls apart, because all the contracts are in government money, and then we can rebuild.
So, I mean, it's in your book, you talk about Milton Friedman talking about the essential need of a crisis, but also the way in which governments exploit a crisis to impose more taxation and more imposition, rather than the opposite.
You were seeing it now with all these riots. The rioters think, they're expressing their anger, but they also think, they're getting their message across, and it doesn't matter if they're rioting. It doesn't matter who's doing the rioting. They all think they're getting their message across and they're helping, but not. All they're doing is enabling the government to do more social media surveillance, more clamping down on free speech, more clamping down on protest, and ultimately government increasing its powers, increasing its reach, and increasing its the amount of GDP that it consumes. It's very bleak. I just sort of block it out and go and write comic songs.
I
really don't. I can see. I can see what the solution is. It's money, but I can see how to get there. But Peter Thiel wrote a very compelling essay in 2008 called "The Education of a Libertarian." One of the arguments he made was that you can't achieve political change through politics, and I don't think you can. You have to achieve it through new frontiers, whether that's in cyberspace and tech. Technology is destiny, and tech is changing a lot of things. If you think of the impact of mobile phones and media and free speech, how that has opened people's eyes to what's going on. But he also talks about new frontiers, whether it's in cyberspace or at sea or underwater, and new countries and so on. It's very hard at the moment, but you're seeing these city-states. There's going to be a few city-states emerging, and that's exciting.
And then, I'm just wondering about just conceptualizing the ideas. And if we, rather than imagining having a libertarian state, if we had a libertarian individual, what would stand out for you if you were sitting down or having a drink with a libertarian? What would you notice about them as a person that would be key to their success?
They started out as socialists. It's amazing. So many libertarians started out as Marxists.
Is that your background?
No, no, it's mine isn't. I never really had a political background. My dad was, SDP, left of centre, and I just sort of thought that anything right wing was evil growing up because that's what I was told, but I didn't really think about it. And I only really got politicised when I started buying and investing in gold in the noughties, and then I learned about sound money. That's only when I was never really. I mean, I voted for Tony Blair in 1997. That's how deluded I was. But just backtracking about Marxists, there's loads of libertarians start out Marxists. You see this with Marxist and libertarian philosophy. They all agree on the problems. They just the Marxist solution is more state, is the state solves it. And the libertarian solution is that the state is the problem. And apart from that, most of the things that rile them about the state of the world, whether it's unnecessary wars or economic injustice or whatever it is, they're the same. They're angry about the same things. It's just a different solution.
And it is that quote, isn't it, that we in your book that jumped off the page for me, if I can just find it, is from Michael Cloud saying the problem isn't the abuse of power, it's the power to abuse. And when I look at the solutions for me of how to manage a withdrawal, is that the challenge is size and bigness, too bigly to, for want of a better phrase of everything, too big state, too big companies as well, the way that some organizations can be so big that they're distorting the market and destroying market forces. It just can't, sorry to talk over you, Jonathan, but it just can't happen. If you look at the way society is set up, the way Westminster is, the way the civil service is, the way the NHS is, the way the education system is, the way that Google and all, it just cannot happen. In what do you mean? What can't happen?
The change that we all want, it can't happen voluntarily. Nobody's just going to back down and cede power. It just, you look at your friend who just tried to do one tiny change in their NHS job. He just got bullied and his life made a misery, or her life made a misery for 2 years. It just cannot happen while the money is everything. And if money can lose its power, then everything else then everything will go bust and we can start again. But while money still has power and government still has this power to create money at no cost to itself, it will be disproportionately powerful. It is inevitable.
And so the other thing about libertarian then is that they're possibly and probably a recovering Marxist. What else about them? I mean, high levels of
you can go and be a libertarian. It's quite easy to have a libertarian existence. You just go and be a digital nomad, Rees-Mogg's sovereign individual, and pay tax to no man and travel from place to place. But it takes quite a lot of effort leading a libertarian existence and exiting the system. And a lot of the time, it's just easier to be in the system and moan about it. And particularly if you want to take roots in one particular place, which a lot of human beings want to do. And so, we have non-dom status for the super rich, and many international corporations effectively have non-dom status because they're different assets and trademarks and so on are all located in different places. But, and it's now possible through technology for people who don't earn very much money to all become digital nomads, and it's a growing workforce. You talk to people in Bitcoin, so many of them are digital nomads, but it's not, so you can still have it, but it takes effort. Probably the most libertarian country. The other problem with being a libertarian is, if the most libertarian country like is Switzerland or something like that, it costs an absolute fortune if you want to move to Switzerland. I think 1 in 7 people in Switzerland are millionaires.
Yeah, no, very difficult. And no, in one of your other books, Daylight Robbery: How Tax Shaped Our Past and Will Change Our Future. I'm guessing, this is just a guess, is that Rachel Reeves has not been in touch to ask you how to change the tax system and to keep her promise that she's not going to increase income tax and VAT and what advice would you give her on understanding the tax system and how to create a smaller state? What would you do if you were Chancellor to improve the tax base?
Well, in an ideal world, I would not tax income. I wouldn't tax it nearly as much. And I would like, you design a society by the way you tax it. And it's fundamental to a society, taxation. And you design all the incentives and you determine that country's destiny by the way you tax it, whether it's going to be prosperous or poor, whether the people are going to be free or subordinated. Taxation is a measure of liberty. The more you're taxed, the less liberty you have, and the less power you have. And you know, you have at one extreme, you have a slave who owns none of his own labor or indeed none of his own body. And at the other extreme, you have an anarchy where there's no taxation and everyone owns their own labor in their entirety. And at the moment, we own about 50 or 60% we own about maybe 50% of our own labor. And the rest is taken from us in taxation. And, you know, in any given day, if you work an 8-hour day, well, the first 4 hours are working to fund the government. It's not free. That's what's happening. And so the first thing I would do is tax people less. But in terms of the tax code specifically, I would reduce income tax. I'd simplify the tax code. We have the longest tax code in the world. I'd go to flat taxes on income tax, 10 or 15%. I mean, obviously, it's just not realistic, but that's what I would do if we're talking about, you know, an idealized thing. And I would tax the location of land rather than income. So, for example, if you own a really expensive house in Westminster, the majority of the taxes that you pay to the government would be based on the value of the land under your house rather than on the income. Because in the one hand, you're producing, you're taxing something that's unproductive, and the other hand, you're taxing something that's productive. The labor is productive, but let's just say you own that prime city centre real estate. Well, it's worth so much because of the needs of the community. It's the community that's made that prime city centre real estate so valuable. Obviously, you've improved the land and built a beautiful house on it, but it's the land in its undervalued in its unimproved state that you would tax. And I call it location value tax, but it's basically an iteration of what Henry George used to talk about. And he based the game Monopoly was based on it, showing you how evil land ownership is and how exploitative monopolistic capitalism is. And you know, it would be based on Henry George, who was the 19th century American philosopher who wrote this book all about it. And it was originally called land value tax, but I don't like that because as soon as you say that, you think farmers pay loads, but they wouldn't. I call it location value tax. And, you know, under this taxation system, you know, the Crown, which owns Buckingham Palace, which is, you know, about as prime city centre real estate as you get, would pay an enormous amount. And you know, a farmer with 20 acres in Lincolnshire would pay nothing because his land's not worth anything.
Looking at the markets, I've seen you've been doing quite a lot of work on the interaction between the land and property market and gold and silver.
Yeah.
Giving our listeners just a take on that? 'Cause I think you're long on precious metals. Is that right?
Well, I like precious metals on point of principle. I think I'll always be long precious metals. But specifically, that article, so there's three functions of money. One is to be a medium of exchange, one is to be a store of value, and one is to be a unit of account. And obviously, the pound is a pretty good medium of exchange because of modern fintech. You can make instantaneous payments on your phone and it's really good. But that's not because of the pound, that's because of all the fintech around the pound. It's an absolutely terrible store of value. Just since 2020, the pound's lost 37% of its purchasing power, I read this week. So more than a third of the value of your money is gone in 4 years. And we only use the pound as a unit of account because we have to declare our taxes. We have to declare in pounds. But actually, because we're using something that's constantly losing purchasing power, it's a stupid unit of account, because you want something that's much more constant. Well, gold is obviously constant because it's been there since the beginning of time, and you can't artificially increase its supply. Its supply grows at the same rate as the population does, and always has. So gold is a better unit of account. Governments can't print it, and if you measure house prices and you use, instead of pounds as your unit of account, you use gold, you'll see that house prices are actually lower now than they were 15 years ago or something, or 20 years ago. And in fact, house prices are the same as they were in the 1950s. If you use gold as your unit account, it takes about 200 ounces of gold to buy the average UK house.
Amazing.
And it just shows you what that is. Is people think they've got rich on the housing market, and yes, they have. But what's also happened is just the pound has declined in value, and nobody can see it. You have all these arguments about unaffordable housing and all the rest of it, and it's all to do with the decline in the value of money, and you just can't see it. But when you use gold as your unit of account, suddenly it changes the prism through which you view things.
And your current show on, so if people can't get to Edinburgh to look at mining, you'll be doing it in London a few times. Will it be available on the internet as well? Will you be doing a recording?
I might, if I remember, record it and stick it on the internet, but I'll probably forget, knowing me. In fact, I'll write a note to self to get a cameraman in and record it. But yeah, I'll probably stick it on the internet, and or maybe I'll record the one in London. But yeah, it's a really interesting show, actually. I wrote it very quickly, and I didn't know how it would go down, but people really seem to be interested by it. It's had really good reviews and stuff. So we did one on gold last year, and it attracted more people, and I guess more people are interested in gold than there are in mining. So the numbers were better last year, but I actually think the show is better this year.
No, I think you I mean, is it a lecture with funny bits? Is that how you describe your stuff, isn't it?
I call it, yeah.
I think that's still available. Is it the Adam Smith lecture?
Well, no, the Adam Smith lecture I took down because we went to make an actual film of it. You can watch the film, which was based around the lecture. And it's an hour-long documentary. It's really good, all about the philosophies of Adam Smith and how they were realised in the economics of the Edinburgh Fringe. Doesn't sound like that compelling a title, but once you watch it, you'll be hooked.
No, I absolutely I love that one. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're very kind.
A wonderful way of bringing it to life, and the difference between the elite doing it their way and giving people what they think they ought to have because it's good for them, and then the democratic side of people being driven just really by the quote of people being driven by their own personal responsibility and interest to share something and to reach out to people, and that being the driver of the Edinburgh Fringe. And that was a great work.
People don't come to the Edinburgh Fringe out of charity. They come here because they want to get noticed and improve their career and make money and get better at what they do. It's all self-interest that drives the whole thing.
Yeah, and then the way in which the change of pricing mechanism as well, that was brilliant, which we won't spoil for people, but we'll send a link out when we release the thing. Is there anything in wrapping up, mate, the next few years, what are you looking at, working on?
Well, I've actually got a question for you, Jonathan, and that is about the 18-year property cycle, which I know is something you're very interested in.
Yeah.
And, it really looked like house prices had hit the skids last year, and then just this week, they're up again. And, it's so teed up for declines starting in, I don't know, late 2025, 2026. It's just so teed up now. There's just so many things, and you could just see them shaping up for, a real correction in housing. And is that what you guys are looking at? You think there's big trouble ahead?
Yeah. And just when every time I tell Phil, it's not gonna go until 26. It's not gonna make it. He said, John, he said, it's everything's going as clockwork. And even the idea that I was once watching, I was a fan of American football, and I was a fan of the New England Patriots, and I was watching the Super Bowl, and they were behind in the final, and it got at halftime they were way behind, and then towards the end, even to the third quarter, they were way behind. And then I woke up to the headlines, Patriots win. And I just couldn't believe it, because they were behind until I think nearly the end of the third quarter. Or they were behind until nearly the very end. But they were just trailing by this biggest margin in Super Bowl history. And so I said, well, then a near miracle, at least two near miraculous plays must have happened for this outcome to take place. And that's what I've learned now to see with the crash coming, is regardless of how unlikely I now perceive it to be that we're not going to make it, and there's all this crash, it'll make it to 25, 26, maybe into 27, given how much money was printed, but it will crash. And then then it's all on for the West, because you've got other things that are going to be driving it, like de-dollarization, like just the weakness in our economy and the way in which our economy now, and in exactly the same way as your book now 12 years on is even more true than it was 12 years ago, that we've now got to be thinking about, well, how do we navigate this, and how do we stop these shocking solutions that would come out of the government saying you can keep all your money, but it has to be digital, and this is when everybody has to be forced to accept a digital currency rather than Bitcoin. And I think that's for me is a much more worrying scenario. But everything that we see is all on, and just when you think it's going to crash, then it's all on again. And the news has got to start getting positive.
And also just the taxes. I think the added taxes that Labour are going to bring could make things even more. It's so expensive to buy a house now. And I just think if they do capital gains tax on your main residence or something like that, that just could seal the deal.
Yeah, and if I guess the delay it, then they'll just, they'll do crazy things, right? Because they're not getting good advice, they're not listening to good advice, and
what's Phil saying? Is he saying 20? Is he giving you a month? Is he being as specific as saying a month, or is he just saying 2026?
No, there's and the lessons from understanding the cycles is that things can get pushed out to by a quarter or even 6 months, and the key is to look at the signs and the symptoms of an impending crash, so that you can time it really well.
So is it anything from like Q4 2025 to Q1 2027?
I would say that would cover the things. I would be surprised if it went earlier, to be honest. My own sense is 26 to 27, but the key thing is to look at the market and to turn down the volume.
So when do we hit the low? 2029.
You what? Sorry.
Get the low then 3 or 4 years after that.
Yeah, 29, 30. So at least 4 years down. And then the question is that the challenge, but what I'm interested in is the way in which everything's shifting. I did an interview with Michael Hudson just as the Ukraine-Russia war was starting, and he was talking about de-dollarization and the rise of the BRIC economies and that trend, right? And then I messaged him about 6 months later, because that whole conflict accelerated the move away from the Western economic system, including SWIFT payments, so that because the West now is showing their hand in taking Russian assets, albeit you can say it's with justification because Russia's a murderous country, blah blah blah, but they're taking assets which are technically illegal. It's technically against the law to steal someone's money and assets and stuff, so you're appropriating that, but they're doing it. And that's, for me, is that the world was moving over towards Africa and Asia and South America, away from the developed nations, and that's just accelerating even further. And then you've got the craziness of the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline and all those things are just it's just forcing everything over towards Asia. And so in that sense, the other thing that we're looking at the moment is to what extent are we going to be turning Japanese, for want of a better phrase, just to paraphrase a song, and have anemic growth / declines for 2-3 decades.
Well, that's been the case since 2008.
I think the key thing, mate, really is that for me is if society is going to have a problem, then the key thing is to create your own community, isn't it? And to have your own group of people that you work with, and looking at, like, for me, like, the insight I get from your Substack, absolutely fantastic. The stuff that we give our subscribers as well on helping them prepare. But then it's also the only answer to every problem is community, and it's local community. Now, what's your question? And so in that, what we're encouraging people to do is to build relationships and links locally, so that they are in a stronger position, and they can get solutions that suit the people, and not just to propagate a system that really should have collapsed a long time ago. Yeah, it was interesting what you just said there about the 50 years for the Roman Empire before it started the decline, or the serious problem started. It's just over 50 years since America came off the gold standard, isn't it?
I know. But that was straight to zero. But yeah, anyway, that's all a bit more. Yeah, there's a lot to it. Anyway, we've got some exciting years ahead, that's for sure.
Unfortunately, we have, haven't we? And it's going to be very exciting. And I'm looking at thinking, do you know what we need to be doing is now that the fear's ramped up on just about everything, and overreactions, is the ability to take a chill pill, and just to stay calm with stuff, right? And to notice your emotions, because that's the thing that pushes people over the edge, and they panic, either jumping up too far, this is my last chance, versus missing out and staying too long in stuff. That emotional management is a crucial thing. And your approach, which is, when I was looking at your the notes again, just about, well, you're a financial commentator / economist and a comedian. And I'm actually thinking now it's not just some strange thing. It's actually a competitive advantage, because you can laugh at it. It takes a comedian to laugh at how crazy this shit is. And I'll put the links out on the podcast for people to find you on social media, and we'll get the Adam Smith documentary as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and if your viewers want to sign up for my Substack, theflyingfrisbee.com, they're very welcome.
Brilliant. All right, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Jonathan.
Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more information, check out the Ethical Economics website, where you'll find more information about our authors and the work of our sponsor, Shepherd Walwyn.